Carrington went to the locker room and tweeted,
"To be upgraded, I think, to a flagrant."
White privileged. How in the hell is this white privilege when you assaulted a player? Sophie didn't touch you. How is this a race issue? Make it make sense. Because I am definitely...
There are moments in professional sports that transcend the game itself. Moments that rip away the polished surface of an organization and expose everything rotting underneath. What happened on the night the Indiana Fever faced the Chicago Sky was not a basketball incident. It was not a hard foul in a physical game. It was a detonation, one that blew apart the carefully constructed image of an entire league in real time, on national television in front of millions of people who were not ready for what they were about to witness. We are talking about a targeted physical assault on a professional athlete. We are talking about a locker room social media grenade thrown while the game was still being played. We are talking about a head coach standing at a podium and choosing the opposition over her own player. And we are talking about the face of the entire league nearly getting suspended over a call so fraudulent that even the officials who made it could not defend it when the tape rolled back. Every single one of those things happened in one night, one game, one catastrophic collapse of institutional credibility that the WNBA is still trying to recover from. If you think you have seen sports drama before, what unfolded between these two teams will reset your entire understanding of how bad things can actually get behind the curtain of professional athletics. Buckle in, because this story goes much deeper than a flagrant foul. The atmosphere inside that arena was already crackling before the opening tip. These two teams had history. There was tension in the building that veteran observers could feel before a single whistle blew. The Indiana Fever came in with something to prove, and from the opening moments of the first quarter, they were playing with an aggression and intensity that signaled this was not going to be a clean, comfortable night of basketball. Sophie Cunningham had been one of the defining stories of the Fever's season heading into this game, not just because of her scoring or her hustle, but because of what she represents inside that locker room. She is the enforcer, the protector, the player that the rest of the roster knows will show up when things get physical and when opponents try to bully their way through the Fever's best players. She had spent the entire season making herself a target precisely because she refuses to let anyone push Caitlin Clark or her teammates around without a consequence. Every single player in the league knows what Cunningham is about. That makes her dangerous, and apparently that made her a marked woman. The sequence began as a straightforward fast break opportunity. Cunningham secured the ball, got out ahead of the defense, and took off down the court with the kind of purposeful aggression that defines her game. She was going up for the layup. The play was essentially finished. The points were there to be taken. What should have happened next was a routine 2 points on the board and play continuing. What actually happened next will make you physically uncomfortable when you watch the footage. Jonai-Carrington, trailing the play from behind, did not attempt to make a legitimate basketball play. She did not challenge the shot from the front or the side. She came from behind, wound up, and delivered a full-force strike directly to Cunningham's head and neck region. The impact was not incidental. It was not the result of mistiming a chase-down block attempt. There was a wind-up. There was a targeted follow-through. The force of the hit completely knocked Cunningham out of the air mid-layup and slammed her violently into the hardwood floor below. Somehow, almost impossibly, the ball went in. The layup counted. But in that moment, no one in that arena was thinking about the scoreboard. Everyone was watching Cunningham hit the floor and wondering if she was okay, and everyone who saw what Carrington did understood on some gut level that something had just crossed a very serious line. The officials converged immediately. They went to the monitors, they reviewed the play from every available angle, and what those angles showed left absolutely no room for debate. The officials themselves noted the windup, they noted the severity of the impact, they noted the reckless, deliberate follow-through. It took them no time at all to upgrade the foul to a flagrant 2, the most serious foul classification in the sport, and Carrington was ejected from the game on the spot.
Yeah, so she said they gave us the same explanation. And when you mix that in with what the referee said even transpired in the first place, once again.
Yeah, she intentionally seeked out the official.
She intentionally, Caitlin Clark intentionally seeked out an official and used
You were backwards to them. Did you even know they were there in that moment?
And through the forearm.
And through a forearm. So Caitlin intentionally, that's a wild accusation, by the way, not accidentally, intentionally.
An ejection, the appropriate consequence for a play that could have seriously injured another professional athlete. And if you assumed that ejection would be the end of the story, you fundamentally misunderstood who Jonai-Carrington decided to be in that moment. Here is where this story stops being about basketball entirely and becomes something far more calculated and far more corrosive. Most players, when ejected from a game, go to the locker room. They cool down. They talk to teammates and coaches. They prepare a post-game statement that is measured and professional because that is what the situation requires and what the league expects. Carrington did none of that. She went to the locker room, pulled out her phone, and within minutes of being escorted off the court, she posted to social media 2 words, white privilege, and she tagged the Indiana Fever organization directly. Let that sink in for a moment. A player who had just been ejected for delivering a flagrant 2 foul to the back of another player's head and neck, a foul the officials described with language about wind-ups and deliberate follow-through, decided that she was the victim. And she decided to broadcast that victimhood publicly, in real time, while the game her teammates were still fighting in continued without her. She did not wait, she did not reflect, she did not consult anyone. She posted, tagged, and threw the match into a powder keg. The response online was immediate and overwhelming. Fans, analysts, and commentators who had watched the footage of the foul could not reconcile the narrative Carrington was attempting to build with the images they had just seen. If the foul had been a borderline call, maybe there was room for conversation. If the officiating had been inconsistent all night, maybe there was context worth exploring. But the footage was unambiguous. There was a wind-up, there was a blow to the head, there was an ejection that every neutral observer agreed was completely justified. The white privilege framing collapsed immediately under the weight of the actual evidence, and the public response reflected that. Comment sections lit up, reaction videos exploded across every platform. Sports commentators who rarely wade into these conversations felt compelled to address it directly. Because what Carrington had done was not just inflammatory, it was demonstrably disconnected from what had actually happened on the court. She had fouled Sophie Cunningham violently and deliberately, and her response was to reframe herself as a victim of racial bias. The Indiana Fever organization was now tagged in a social media controversy not of their making, during a game they were still playing, sparked by the player who had just assaulted one of their own. The digital warfare had been declared unilaterally, and the Fever had no choice but to eventually respond to it. But before the organization could formulate any kind of coherent response, Sophie Cunningham herself stepped in front of the cameras and did the job herself. There is a certain kind of athlete who falls apart when the moment gets too big, who shrinks from the cameras, gives vague non-answers, and lets the narrative get written by everyone else around them. Sophie Cunningham is not that athlete, not even close. When the post-game reporters caught up with her, she was composed, direct, and surgical in the way she dismantled every possible angle Carrington's social media post had tried to establish. She did not yell, she did not perform outrage, she simply told the truth in plain, uncomplicated language, and in doing so, she completely controlled the story. Cunningham stated clearly that she believed the foul was absolutely intentional. She told reporters that it was unnecessary, that she had never really spoken to Carrington before, that there was no beef between them as far as she was aware, and that the foul made no logical sense in a basketball context, which led her to one conclusion. Carrington, she said, had some pent-up stuff she was carrying, and she decided to take it out on Cunningham during a fast break layup attempt. Cunningham made it explicitly clear that she was not going to be the kind of player who lets something like that go. She was not going to stay down and play the victim, she was not going to pretend it was a basketball play, and she was certainly not going to let the locker room's social media post go unanswered in the court of public opinion.
The response was powerful precisely because it was grounded. No escalation, no inflammatory language, just a player who knew what had happened to her, knew why it had happened, and said so in terms that anyone watching could understand. Cunningham handled herself with the kind of dignity and clarity that Carrington's subsequent social media behavior looked even more reckless by comparison. But while Cunningham was delivering one of the most composed post-game performances of the season, something was happening on the other side of the Fever's operation that no one in that locker room could have anticipated. Something that, in some ways, stung worse than the foul itself. When a player on your team takes a flagrant 2 to the back of the head during a fast break, there is a social contract that every professional athlete understands implicitly. The coaching staff has your back, full stop. You might not always agree on strategy, you might have tension in the locker room about roles and minutes and all the thousand small grievances that accumulate over a long season. But when someone physically attacks one of your players in a way that gets them ejected, when the officials themselves use language about wind-ups and deliberate follow-through, your coach stands at the podium and condemns it. That is not a complicated ask, that is the baseline. Stephanie White did not meet that baseline, not even close. Standing in front of the cameras in her post-game availability, the Indiana Fever head coach looked directly into the recording devices of every media outlet present and said that it was a hard foul, but then added, shockingly, that she did not believe Jonai-Carrington intentionally came out to get Cunningham across the neck the way she did. She acknowledged the foul happened, she acknowledged the result, but she actively, publicly, on the record, defended the intent of the player who had just delivered a flagrant 2 to one of her own athletes. She gave the opposition's actions the benefit of the doubt that she apparently could not extend to the player bleeding in her own locker room. The fallout from that statement was instantaneous and merciless. Fever fans who had spent the entire season watching this coaching staff navigate the complicated dynamics of a rapidly rising team felt something break in real time. This was not a diplomatic answer. It was not nuanced leadership threading a careful needle between competitive fire and sportsmanship. It was a coach publicly minimizing the malicious intent of a play that the officials had already classified as flagrant, the highest level of intentional foul in the game. The officials saw it, the replay monitors confirmed it, Stephanie White apparently did not. The question that immediately dominated fan discussions and media commentary was devastatingly simple. Whose side are you on? If Sophie Cunningham goes back to that locker room, opens her phone, and sees her head coach at the podium telling reporters that the woman who just knocked her to the floor probably did not mean it, what does that do to the relationship between player and coach? What does that do to the trust that an entire locker room has spent a season building? What signal does that send to every other player on that roster about what happens when they get targeted? The coaching staff had failed their enforcer, and the entire league was watching it happen in real time. While the Cunningham-Carrington saga was already consuming the post-game narrative, the officiating crew was quietly constructing their own disaster in the third quarter, one that threatened to turn a bad night into a full-blown institutional catastrophe. Caitlin Clark is the most commercially significant player in the WNBA. That is not a subjective take or a hot sports opinion. It is a measurable, documented reality reflected in ticket sales, television ratings, merchandise revenue, and every relevant metric the league tracks. Protecting that commercial asset is not just good sportsmanship. It is literally in the financial interest of every franchise operating under the WNBA umbrella. Sidelining Clark over a phantom call would not just be unfair, it would be economically devastating in a way the league could not easily absorb.
The officiating crew either did not understand that reality or did not care about it, because what they called on Caitlin Clark in that third quarter was one of the most embarrassing moments in recent WNBA officiating history. Clark was hip-bumped by Natasha Howard while mobile, a clear foul that was not called. The physics of the play are not complicated. When you are moving at speed and someone applies lateral force to your body, your trajectory changes in ways you cannot control. Clark's momentum, altered by Howard's contact, carried her into an official. That contact was the result of an uncalled foul. It was not a choice. It was not an intentional act. It was physics. The officials assessed Clark a technical foul anyway, and not just any technical foul, her 8th of the season. In the WNBA, the 8th technical foul carries an automatic, mandatory one-game suspension. The league's biggest star, in the middle of a game already engulfed in controversy, was now one bureaucratic rubber stamp away from being forced to sit out based on a call that every available piece of footage suggested was completely unjustifiable. The reaction from Clark herself was, once again, a clinic in composed superstar behavior. She did not explode. She did not make the officials' night more difficult. She did not give the league any additional ammunition to use against her. Instead, she went to her post-game interview, calmly stated that the official had claimed she ran into her, made it clear that she had already reviewed the tape, expressed her expectation that the league would handle it correctly, and noted firmly that nothing was said during the entire interaction. No trash talk, no aggression, no technical foul-worthy conduct of any kind. Just a player who knew she was right and trusted the review process to confirm it. Even Coach White, who had already spent her podium time defending Jonai-Carrington, had to concede at this point that the technical foul called on Clark was a bad call. That admission from a coach who had just shown a remarkable willingness to give the opposition the benefit of the doubt made the officiating look even worse. If Stephanie White was willing to say it was a bad call, you know it was a bad call. The WNBA front office found itself staring at a scenario with no clean exits. On one side, a viral social media controversy involving a player who had been ejected for a flagrant foul and immediately took to the internet to post inflammatory content tagging another franchise. On the other side, the league's most commercially valuable player on the verge of an automatic suspension over a call that the tape had already dismantled thoroughly. The league made the correct decision, even if they did not make it with anything resembling speed or grace. They officially rescinded Caitlin Clark's technical foul, removing the suspension threat and acknowledging implicitly but unmistakably that the officials had gotten it wrong. Clark would play. The league's most important commercial asset would not be sitting out games because of a hip bump that was never called in the first place. But the rescinding of that technical foul, while the right outcome, opened up a different and far more uncomfortable conversation. If the officials got it that wrong enough that the league reviewed it and wiped it off the books, then what does that say about the broader officiating environment around Caitlin Clark this season? Because this was not an isolated incident. This was part of a pattern that observers had been documenting all year, a recurring dynamic where calls around Clark seemed to consistently trend in directions that benefited her opponents and penalized her for contact that originated from fouls that were never whistled. The league rescinded the technical, but they did not address the pattern. They did not address Jonai-Carrington's social media conduct in any meaningful public way, and they did not address Carrington's second, arguably more sinister social media post, the one where she tweeted 8/23 with a smiley emoji, tagging the WNBA account directly. August 23rd, the date of the next scheduled matchup between the Indiana Fever and the Chicago Sky.
Carrington was not posting a calendar reminder, she was issuing a message, and the WNBA's silence in response to that message spoke volumes about where the league's institutional courage actually stands.
Strip away the specific names and the specific plays and the specific tweets, and what you have here is a story about what happens when the unspoken rules of professional sports stop being enforced. What happens when a player can commit a flagrant 2 assault, immediately post inflammatory content on social media tagging the victim's organization, then follow that up with what many observers interpreted as a veiled threat, and face no meaningful institutional consequences beyond the ejection that already happened during the game? What happens when a head coach abandons the most fundamental responsibility of her role and publicly minimizes violence against her own player in front of the entire media corps? What happens when an officiating crew gets so lost in the chaos of a single game that they nearly suspend the sport's most important player over a call so bad that the league itself had to step in and erase it? Sophie Cunningham took a blow to the head and neck and stood up swinging, figuratively in her post-game interview, and yes, briefly literally on the court. She did not let the narrative get away from her. She did not let the white privilege framing go unanswered. She named what happened, called it what it was, and did it with a composure that made everyone watching feel the full weight of what Carrington had done. Caitlin Clark navigated a deliberately hostile officiating environment, helped her team to a 90-86 victory that could have easily fallen apart amid all the chaos, and then handled the post-game media with the kind of precision and restraint that has become her signature. She did not need her coach to defend her at the podium. She defended herself, clearly and calmly, with nothing but the facts and the tape. And somewhere in all of this, the Indiana Fever coaching staff has some very serious internal conversations to have about what kind of leadership this team actually has at the top. Because the player who got struck, the one whose mouth was reportedly bleeding after the hit, needed more from her head coach than she got that night. That gap between what was needed and what was delivered does not disappear when the next game tips off. It lingers. It affects the trust in a locker room in ways that are difficult to rebuild once they have been cracked. The fans saw all of it. The tape does not lie. The social media posts do not disappear. And the league's response, or lack thereof in several critical areas, has been noted by everyone paying attention. The WNBA made the right call on Clark's technical, but the broader accountability question for everything else that happened that night remains loudly, conspicuously unanswered. This story is not finished. August 23rd is on the calendar, and everyone involved in what happened that night knows it. What do you think? Did Coach White's statement at that podium cross a line that cannot be walked back? And does the league need to come down significantly harder on players using social media to escalate conflict mid-game? Drop your take in the comments below. The conversation on this one is far from over.